A devastating war was raging in Europe, and a small Southeast Asian kingdom known as Siam, today known as Thailand, decided to make a bold move. Being surrounded by colonial empires, it declared war on the Central Powers, Germany and Austria-Hungary, in 1917, and sent the Siamese Expeditionary Force to Europe. This monument is dedicated to those volunteers. This here is a story of Siam during World War I. The Kingdom of Siam, as Thailand was known during the First World War, was one of the smaller nations that eventually joined the conflict on the side of the Allied powers. For the first 3 years of the war, Siam remained neutral, carefully observing events unfolding in Europe, while trying to protect its own political and economic interests. In 1917, however, the kingdom abandoned neutrality and declared war on Germany and Austria-Hungary. At first glance, Siam's participation in the war may seem insignificant compared to the enormous armies fighting in Europe. Yet, for Siam's rulers, joining the war was never mainly about military strength. Instead, it was a calculated political decision. The Siamese leadership believed that supporting the Allies would improve the kingdom's international standing, strengthen national unity at home, and help free Siam from the unequal treaties imposed upon it by the Western colonial powers. Rather than limiting itself to symbolic declarations or economic support, Siam took a remarkable step of sending troops to Europe. The Siamese Expeditionary Forces became one of the few military contingents from Asia to serve on the Western Front during the war. Although the troops arrived late and saw little combat, their deployment carried enormous political and symbolic importance. To understand why Siam entered the war, it is important to first examine the kingdom's position in 1914. At that time, Siam faced serious challenges, both domestically and internationally. Although the country had never been formally colonized, it existed in a region dominated by European empires. To the west stood British-controlled Burma, while to the east lay French Indochina. Siam's independence depended largely on maintaining a delicate balance between these competing colonial powers. In the decades before the war, Siam had already been forced to make painful concessions. Britain and France had pressured the kingdom into surrendering territory, and the unequal treaties limited Siam's control over foreign trade and foreign citizens living inside the country. These agreements granted special legal protections to Europeans and reduced Siam's ability to act as a fully sovereign state. Domestically, Siam remained an absolute monarchy ruled by Vajiravudh, also known as Rama VI. He became king in 1910 following the death of his father, King Chulalongkorn, whose reign had transformed Siam through a series of sweeping modern reforms. Vajiravudh had received a British education and admired many aspects of Western culture, but he also faced major political challenges at home. Siamese society at the time was still overwhelmingly agricultural. Most people lived in rural areas, while Bangkok stood as the kingdom's only major urban center. Rice production formed the backbone of the economy alongside exports such as sugar, tin, and rubber. Industrialization remained limited, and much of the country's commercial activity was controlled by Chinese merchant communities who had settled in Siam over previous decades. The Siamese government had spent years modernizing the kingdom in an effort to resist colonization. Western-style reforms were introduced into administration, law, education, and the military. European advisors were hired, railways were constructed, and telegraph systems linked different parts of the country. The ruling elite viewed Western civilization as a model of modernity and power. To survive in an imperialist world, Siam believed it needed to adopt Western institutions and demonstrate that it was a modern state worthy of equal treatment. Germany played an especially important role in this process. Unlike Britain and France, Germany possessed no colonies bordering Siam and was therefore not viewed as a direct threat. German businesses established a strong presence in Bangkok, and German shipping companies dominated regional trade routes linking Siam with Singapore and Hong Kong. German engineers helped develop Siam's railways and communications infrastructure, while German medicine and technology were highly respected within the kingdom. When the First World War erupted in Europe in 1914, Siam immediately declared neutrality. This decision was widely supported by the government. The conflict seemed distant, and Siam had little to gain by becoming involved in a massive European war. Furthermore, nobody could predict how the conflict would end. Yet, neutrality became increasingly difficult to maintain as the war dragged on. Bangkok slowly turned into a center of diplomatic rivalry and propaganda. Both Allied and German representatives attempted to influence Siamese officials and public opinion. German commercial ships sought refuge in Siamese waters, while British and French diplomats pushed Siam to support the Allied cause. Within the Siamese elite itself, opinions were deeply divided. Some members of the royal family and military leadership supported the Allies, particularly Britain and France. Others had studied in Germany and admired German military traditions, developing strong pro-German sympathies. King Vajiravudh himself leaned toward Britain, but initially preferred caution and neutrality. As the war continued, however, global opinion gradually shifted against Germany. Reports of trench warfare, chemical weapons, and attacks on civilian shipping shocked many observers around the world. At the same time, the Allies increased pressure on neutral states to support their cause. By 1917, support for intervention had grown stronger within Siam's leadership. Several factors influenced this decision. First, Siamese leaders recognized that the Allies appeared increasingly likely to win the war. Joining the Allied side late in the conflict would therefore involve relatively little military risk, while potentially bringing significant diplomatic rewards. Second, the war offered Siam an opportunity to strengthen its claim to full sovereignty. The kingdom hoped that participation in the conflict would allow it to renegotiate or abolish the unequal treaties imposed by Western powers. Siam wanted recognition as an equal member of the international community rather than as a weak Asian state subject to European control. And third, the war served domestic political purposes. King Vajiravudh used nationalism and patriotism to strengthen support for the monarchy. Participation in the global conflict could unite the population behind the king while portraying Siam as a proud and modern nation. The entry of the United States into the war in April 1917 further influenced Siam's decision. The United States framed the conflict as a struggle for civilization, international law, and justice. Siam's leaders recognized an opportunity to align themselves with these ideals and present the kingdom as a progressive nation deserving respect. On the 22nd of July 1917, Siam officially declared war on Germany and Austria-Hungary. The government acted quickly and efficiently. German and Austro-Hungarian citizens living in Siam were arrested and interned. German-owned businesses were seized, and German ships anchored in Siamese ports were confiscated before their crews could sabotage them. The declaration of war immediately benefited British commercial interests as German competitors disappeared from the Siamese economy overnight. British diplomats also welcomed the removal of German influence within the kingdom, especially concerns about German intelligence activities in Southeast Asia. The Siamese government then faced a much bigger question. How actively should the kingdom participate in the war? Many small countries contributed little beyond declarations of support or economic assistance. Siam, however, chose a far more ambitious path by deciding to send troops to Europe. This decision was extraordinary. Few people in Europe expected soldiers from an independent Asian kingdom to appear on the Western Front. For Siam's leaders, however, the expeditionary force would serve as powerful proof that the kingdom was modern, civilized, and capable of contributing to international affairs. The idea partially originated from French suggestions that Siam could provide volunteer ambulance units, drivers, pilots, and mechanics. Siam's military was not equipped for large-scale trench warfare, but it did possess a relatively modern aviation division and officers trained in European military methods. In September 1917, the Siamese government issued a call for volunteers. The stated goals were clear: to support the Allied war effort, gain military experience, and uphold Siam's national honor and dignity. The resulting Siamese Expeditionary Forces consisted of roughly 1,300 men. Around 400 belonged to the Aviation Corps, including pilots and mechanics, while the rest formed a motor transport corps made up of drivers, mechanics, medical personnel, and support staff. Preparation for the mission took many months. Troops received training and vaccinations while transport arrangements were organized. In January 1918, an advance mission led by Major General Praya Piyai Yanridi traveled to Europe to prepare for the arrival of the main force. Praya Piyai had studied military affairs in Europe and spoke fluent French, making him an ideal commander for the mission. Finally, on the 20th of June 1918, the main expeditionary force departed Bangkok aboard the SS Empire. The departure became a major national event. King Vajiravudh personally attended the send-off ceremony, while cheering crowds gathered along the Khao e Phraya River to watch the soldiers leave for Europe. After traveling through Singapore, Colombo, and Port Said, the Siamese troops arrived in Marseille on the 30th of July, 1918. Their arrival, however, did not unfold exactly as Siam's leaders had hoped. French officials initially mistook the Siamese soldiers for colonial troops from French Indochina, deeply offending Siamese diplomats and officers who wanted their kingdom recognized as an independent ally rather than a colony. The timing also worked against them. By mid-1918, thousands of American troops were arriving in France every day, overshadowing the relatively small Siamese contingent. Once in France, the Aviation Corps was sent to training camps at Istres, Avourt, and Pau. The Transport Corps trained near Lyon before eventually moving closer to the front lines. In October 1918, the Motor Transport Corps began supplying Allied troops in the Champagne region using French military vehicles. Although the Siamese troops performed their duties effectively, tensions soon developed between the Siamese officers and their French counterparts. Communication problems created difficulties, but the deeper issue was racial prejudice and condescending attitudes among some French officers. Siamese commanders increasingly felt that they were being ignored or treated as inferior. French liaison officers often bypassed Siamese commanders and directly ordered the troops themselves. This deeply offended the Siamese leadership, who believed their soldiers deserved the same respect granted to European forces. Complaints reached Siamese diplomats in Paris and eventually the king himself. At one point, frustration became so severe that Siamese leaders considered withdrawing the expedition entirely. French diplomats quickly realized the danger this posed to Franco-Siamese relations and attempted to improve the situation. Fortunately for both sides, events soon changed dramatically. On the 11th of November 1918, the armistice ended the fighting on the Western Front. Following the armistice, Siamese troops were assigned to the Allied occupation of Germany. The Motor Transport Corps crossed into German territory and served mainly in the Palatinate region around Neustadt. For King Vajiravudh, the moment carried enormous symbolic importance. He later described the entry of Siamese troops into Germany as one of the proudest moments of his life. Although Siamese forces had seen little direct combat, their presence inside defeated Germany allowed Siam to present itself as a victorious Allied power. The Siamese troops remained in Germany until mid-1919. During this period, they participated in the Allied victory parades held in Paris, London, and Brussels. These ceremonies were highly symbolic. For the first time, Siamese soldiers marched alongside the armies of the great European powers under the eyes of kings, presidents, and massive crowds. The image was powerful. An independent Asian nation standing among the victors of the First World War, the Expeditionary Force suffered relatively few casualties. 19 members died during the mission, mostly from disease, especially the influenza pandemic, or from accidents rather than enemy action. The Aviation Corps returned to Siam in May 1919, while the Motor Corps arrived later that year. Their return was celebrated with massive public ceremonies. Bangkok held several days of parades, religious events, and official commemorations honoring the soldiers and the kingdom's role in the war. Nevertheless, Siam's decision to join the First World War had long-lasting consequences. Militarily, its contribution may have been small, but politically the impact was enormous. By sending the Siamese Expeditionary Forces to Europe, the kingdom demonstrated that it was more than just another vulnerable Asian state caught between empires. Click here to learn about other nations during the First World War. It's an awesome playlist. Go check it now.